Kay Sargent. Welcome to the Neuroarchitecture.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start with your story. What's your career path been like, and what pulled you toward neuro-inclusive workplace design?
So I could go way back, but I'll just say this. I am a practicing interior designer for over 40 years. I am the mother of 5 children, 3 of whom are neurodiverse and are neurodivergent. And probably about 10 years ago, I was in a room with one of our clients who has a large portfolio of space all around the world. And at the end of the meeting, he asked, "How do you design for someone that has ADHD?" And I had a good answer, but not a great answer to that question. And so we wanted to get a little bit more information to give to him. So we started to do some research. And over the last 10 years now, we have just, I think initially we found this huge gap that there wasn't a lot of information out there really about how people respond to the built environment and the impact that it has. And so we started to do some studies, we started to do more research, we did literature reviews, we've done pilots, and 10 years later, we kind of published it all so that everybody else in the field and, even our competitors can have that, because I think we realize as designers and architects that the built environment has a huge impact on how people feel, how they think, how they process in the spaces that they're in, and that we need to be able to create spaces where everyone can thrive. So we are continuing to do that research, and I think we're expanding it into all kinds of sectors right now.
So, we're talking here about schools, about playgrounds, about offices, houses, public places. So it's not like limited to a certain place or a certain, like design.
So when we started our work, my expertise really is around workplace. And I work with a lot of large corporations that have millions of square feet around the world. So the initial research was really around how it was impacting people in the workspace. And we quickly realized that people aren't just coming to work. In fact, not everybody goes to an office. So it was important that we really kind of expanded that research. And I'm very fortunate that I work at a firm, HOK, which is one of the largest architectural firms in the world. And we do everything from healthcare, hospitality, higher ed. We design airports, we design stadiums, we design courthouses, justice systems. And so all of the disciplines and all of the practice areas that we really focus on started to adapt the information that we were assimilating and started to apply that to those different fields. And even though we don't do a lot of residential space, several people have now taken those same principles and applied it, whether it's to their home or to residential areas or mixed use facilities, because a lot of it really applies no matter where you are. So yes, it's really kind of, I think, that's one of the most delightful parts of all of this, is to see how it has changed the way that we design airports. It's changed the way that we design sporting facilities to really try to make all spaces that we go to more inclusive.
I even work because I delved into the part of designing for ADHD and neurodivergent, and like places for inclusiveness. And we're talking about the presence also. We're talking about unexpected, like places people don't think about, but really every place matters for our well-being and for adaptation of people, no matter their backgrounds or how they think or how their brain is structured.
Yes, and I think that's a great point. And it's not even just the spaces that we're going to. It's even how are we getting there. So it's thinking about, how are we designing our cities? How are we designing the landscapes and urban planning to really think about creating spaces so that by the time you get to the building, you're not just so spent that, you can't even function anymore. It's about that entire journey from, when you wake up in the morning all the way through your day and all of the places that you can go to. So we're working with people right now about making grocery stores, which by design can be very chaotic, lots of options, lots of choices, very overwhelming. But how do we make those better experiences for people that get overloaded very easily, either with sensory stimulation or proximity to people or too many options and choices, whether it's harsh lighting, a variety of things that are negatively impacting people. And so thinking about every facet of our days, walking through to really kind of think about how do we do this best.
Mm. Because whether we want it or not, our body, with our senses and our eyes and our structure, we will capture um, everything around us. So whether we want it or not, or we're focused on the road, just to arrive to the workplace, we will feel overwhelmed by all the information around us. Um,
Yeah, I think you made a really interesting point because you said you feel overwhelmed. We actually feel before we think, right? So when you physically walk into a space, you have a gut reaction. You have a sense about whether you feel safe or not. You have a sense of whether it's welcoming or not. And so I think our bodies are responding to things very, very quickly. And so it's important for us really to think about how are we creating spaces that are psychologically safe, but also not so dull and boring
mm,
that they also create an element of delight and wonder, right? And so there's a really delicate balance. And we also have to think about the fact that we're designing for people that are hyposensitive, that need more sensory stimulation, and people that are hypersensitive. They actually get overwhelmed. And so creating that balance is a really fine line that we have to think about in all the spaces that we're creating.
Actually, this is a good point because many people think that also like the less you go, sometimes the better. Whereas, the child cannot develop, their brains or imaginative part completely if they are in a very, like, let's say, boring place without
Right.
enough information, or we feel bored. We feel that there's something missing because we're used to fractal, of nature, these patterns that are very rich in design and colors.
I think right now we are being overwhelmed with sensory stimulation, right? Whether it's sound, light, temperature, noise, touch, electronics, all of those things, everything that is coming at us. But even people that are hypersensitive, that are getting overwhelmed very easily by that, don't want boring spaces. They just want spaces that are a little bit more controlled or a little bit more intentionally designed. And having access to areas that can give you those moments of inspiration or delight is really important. I mean, nature is not boring, but it can be very calming. And so it's about the way that we put spaces together. And I think in a lot of solutions, what we're seeing is people are dumbing down the spaces to get rid of sensory stimulation. And that's actually not the goal, right? Because sensory deprivation is actually a form of torture. And
Mm,
nowhere in nature is there a rectangular white box, yet we
mm.
continually put people in those types of spaces and then expect them to feel comfortable. So we have to think about how are we intentionally incorporating elements that will have a positive impact on us. Color can have a positive or a negative. Red can make you a little bit more anxious. It can make you a little bit more hungry, right? But then in other colors can maybe calm you down. And to make this even more complicated, you have to think about the cultural context as well, because color and the way you feel about things can vary from country to country and person to person.
For anyone hearing this term for the first time, what is the workplace strategy in simple everyday words?
It is a logical approach to decision making. It is evidence-based design. So rather than just throwing a bunch of things in there that you think look good, it's about asking the right questions. What are people actually doing? What do they actually need? How should we be designing the spaces to support what the company values or the outcome of that? And so it's about having a deep understanding of what a organization's DNA is, what kind of industry are they in, what are the demographics, what are the work styles, what are the missions, the culture, and then designing intentionally to get a result that will support that.
So if we want to delve deeper in this concept, we're talking about quantifying results or, doing research and then checking it also through research, checking the post occupancy design.
So it's really about, design is an art, but there also is a science
Mm.
to it. And I will argue with anybody that every decision that we make, scale, size, light, color, temperature, has an impact on the people in that space. And the question is, do you understand what that impact is? And is it the one that you want? And so it's about using the evidence, and that's why we're doing a ton of research right now to kind of bolster some of that evidence that we have to see what is positively and negatively impacting people and to expand the options. So right now, a lot of people just say, all right, well, if you're neurodivergent or if you're overwhelmed, go work from home, go sit in a quiet booth by yourself, or put on headphones. But for a lot of people, that's not the right answer. And not everybody that's neurodivergent is antisocial. In fact, a lot of people
Mhm.
that are ADHD need to be around others to kind of get that energy that they need. They need to kind of have that direction, that social engagement. They need to kind of be keep kept on path. So the defaults that we're going to right now are band-aids. And what we're really saying is we need a much deeper understanding about the people that we are designing for so that we can design spaces that will get the right types of results for what we're looking for.
Mhm. So here I thought of 2 points. The first one is the importance in universities to talk about the concept of their design. So when they present their project, to tell not only like an emotional story, but to talk about the angles that the support they have through research that let them do this line and the other line and do the configuration within the space.
Right, right. So in design school, we all learn about the elements and the principles of design, right? Emphasis, rhythm, harmony, kind of those principles, just a few. And then when we think about the elements of design, light, color, texture, mass, that is a designer's toolkit for how we can create spaces. The other part of this, though, that's really important is for us to have a deeper understanding about individuals and people and to understand, how people respond to certain things and why. And so I think that that element is something that we need to focus on more and more. So we're really doing a lot of research right now. Initially, it was about what were the factors that were impacting people. Now it's really about understanding it from different perspectives, having a deeper understanding because there's this whole notion of nothing about us without us. We're all so unique that I think as designers, we try to have a lot of empathy for who we're designing for and understand what they're experiencing. And that can be a challenge because people are different and unique, and we don't want to oversimplify that at all. But I think it is important for us to understand that not everybody reacts like we do. So it's called the double empathy problem. And I think right now, a lot of people assume that everybody has a similar reaction to things that they do. If I like this and everybody else does. If I don't have a problem with, the light color or this texture, then nobody else will, right? And I think we need to understand that that is not the case, that we are all unique and that this kind of one size misfits all that we've been going towards is not the right approach. That we need to have a little bit of option, a little bit of choice and variety, not too much because that's overwhelming. And I think right now in universities, this is becoming a really big issue, not just in the education, but also in the population, because over 50% of 20-year-olds identify as being neurodivergent. And so a lot of people are saying, "Oh, what is happening? Like, why all of a sudden is there this huge increase in the number of people that are considering themselves to be neurodivergent or have been diagnosed as being neurodivergent?" I don't think it's a massive increase. I think it's a massive increase in awareness. I think in past generations, this was something that went grossly underdiagnosed. People either didn't get tested for it. If they did, they didn't talk about it. Like only 4% of the population that is neurodivergent even discloses that at their workplace because they either don't want to be other, they don't know how to address it, they don't want to be stigmatized. So I think there is a huge awakening right now to this. And I think in our research, we ultimately came to this decision that sensory processing and cognitive well-being impacts every single person. I don't know a single person on the planet that isn't impacted by light, color, temperature, sound, all those things, right? To what degree you're impacted and how vary wildly, but we're all impacted by this. But what might be annoying for someone who's deemed kind of neurotypical can be debilitating for someone that is neurodivergent. And so understanding that there's this vast spectrum of how we respond to that stimulation is really important from a design standpoint to make sure we are creating spaces where everyone can thrive.
Mhm. And also the fact that with time, we had even more overwhelming architecture and, urban design and crowdedness that made, and, this panels, for ads that are really like next to each other with different lights that even revealed more cases or increased the symptoms of more cases. This is how also we were able to diagnose even more people.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. Our urban planning and landscape team right now is doing some research into this as well because urbanization is on the rise. Cities are getting more and more crowded, and I think we're realizing we've kind of hit this tipping point in many places. And so you're starting to see a little bit of pushback. You're starting to see people wanting more walkable cities. They want more greenery. They want more parks. They want more facades of buildings that aren't what I would call aggressive architecture, right? That is more soft to the people that are experiencing it. And it's in a whole variety of building types, right? You have federal buildings, you have municipal buildings, you have civic buildings, workplace buildings, a variety, and trying to make them all a little bit more friendly for the people that are walking in that city is really an important element, just to kind of reducing that stress that I think we are all increasingly feeling today.
Mm. So you said aggressive, and I would like to point out to the fact that aggressive can be just this simple straight facade of glass. This can be aggressive, not only the over, ornamented. Maybe the ornamented is very calming for us.
Yeah. Well, in the ornamented architecture, I think there's a little bit of delight and wonder, and you can get lost in some of those details, and it's a little bit more on the human scale. I think when we start talking about aggressive architecture, there's that brutalist architecture that is very simplistic but very bold and kind of in your face. There's also the architecture of very rough patterns and materials that just can be very off-putting and are basically telling you stay away from this, right? So I think that aggressive architecture can really be whether it's a rough finish or brutalist architecture or things that aren't necessarily designed for human scale. And I think there's a huge movement right now towards human-centric architecture. And there has been for a long time, but really an increased focus about we're designing for people. So how are people relating to these spaces. So it's not just about these massive sculptures that we're dropping down into the cities and what it looks like. It's about what is the human experience and how does that relate to people?
Mhm. You were talking a lot about research. So, for example, in my research, I use a lot of tools such as eye tracking, emotional facial expressions, voice tones, the electric conductance, the skin, the heartbeat. So, do you do the same in your research?
I love that you do that. Kudos to you, first of all. Some of the research that we've done was started really during COVID. So a lot of it was surveys, but then we kind of expanded into on-site observations. We did a lot of workshops, and we started to introduce biometrics as well. So one of the research studies that we did recently kind of was a combination of all of those. We were relocating a group of individuals, and so before they moved, we did a kind of pre-occupancy assessment, and then we designed a space that would be neuro-inclusive. 3 months after they moved into the new space, again, we did a post-occupancy assessment, and the whole entire time we were tracking their biometrics. So we can tell you whether they were sleeping better, moving more, what their heart rate was in the old space, while they were working from home, on the weekends and in the new space. And it's absolutely fascinating to see. I think in the old space where they didn't have as many options and choices, they kind of stayed in kind of like this consistent, I would say, slug mode, right? They weren't moving a lot, and so their heart rate wasn't varying. In the new space where they had more options and choices, their resting heart rate was lower, but their active heart rate was higher. And
Mm.
so we actually achieved a more of a range, which was good because you don't want to just be in kind of this static zone all day. Our bodies were not meant to sit for long periods, right? We were meant to have kind of undulations in our rhythms. And so we found that that was true. We found that people felt better. They were moving or they were more physically active, which then cognitively made them more engaged, and that they were actually sleeping better at night. So yes, we're using all those kinds of things, and we would love to continue to expand on some of that as we go forward.
People who do this kind of research will understand us when we're excited to see the results because, like, you see in numbers what's happening.
Yeah. Well, it was absolutely fascinating to us. And some of it is when we're asking people a question like, how do you feel, et cetera, but the biometrics also really supported a lot of what we were finding. And, it's very scientific. It's not about feeling, it's about what is actually physically happening. And it was amazing the difference that we found between the two spaces and the impact that it had on individuals.
Mhm. Because even on a conscious level, people might choose, terms that are not compatible with what's really happening with them.
I think that's a fascinating point, and I think, we found that people's sensory intelligence was actually really low. Like, if I asked somebody what their triggers might be, they had to think about it, right? And for some people, if it's severe, you know it right away, right? But there are a lot of little things that we find irritating that people can't clearly articulate because we have been so overwhelmed with sensory stimulation that we've taught ourselves just to ignore it
Mm.
and to block it out. And so people will put up with ridiculous situations because we have been so trained to block it out. I will tell you we did an experiment once, unintentionally, but I had a group of people that came together on a hot summer morning for a meeting after a long weekend. Now the air conditioning had not been on in the building. And so when we walked in that morning, it was really hot. And so we opened all the windows to get some air going through. And right when we started the meeting at 8 o'clock in the morning, we had about 20 leaders of corporate real estate around the table to talk about issues in the built environment. Right when we started talking, the construction site next door kicked into gear and a jackhammer started to go off. And it was so loud, it was almost deafening. And I instinctively moved to close the window. And then I said, nope, I'm going to not. I'm going to wait and see if anybody says anything. For 20 minutes, nobody said a word. They all politely just tried to ignore it or, nobody said, "Hey, can we close the window?" They all just tried to handle it, right? And then finally, I stopped this. I went and closed the window because there were 2 women that were so physically agitated. They were so bothered that I couldn't do it anymore. And the rest of the 2-hour meeting, those 2 women never really recovered. Never. But they never said anything because we have trained ourselves just to put up with things that are intolerable. And we need to expect more and better. But right now, I think we are just so out of touch with that and have trained ourselves to put up with it that we aren't demanding that we address these kinds of situations. And we've lost touch with what really is and isn't impacting us.
Mhm. But also, I believe that this is because people want to belong to the group. So if they say something that might sound different, like for the others, they are scared to be rejected from this group that they are attached. And one of our purposes in life is to feel that we are accepted in a group in the society. But they should not be scared to say their opinion, even if some people will maybe reject their point, there will be many others who will say, "Finally, someone said it."
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a really interesting situation. It's a tough one. It does get into that group think. But one of the most delightful things about people that are neurodivergent is they tend to have a strong sense for justice and tend to maybe want to point out the obvious and don't really fall into that group mindset, that group think mindset, which is sometimes people can view that as being, a complainer or they're being a difficult employee. But in reality, I think they are stating the obvious and they're bringing a new mindset and a new perspective that is really important.
So when you say you're not comfortable in a place, you're not lunatic and you're not spoiled, you're not oversensitive. You just, you're aligned with what you're feeling, with what your body is trying to tell you, because we have also receptors that, even sensitive people, what we call sensitive people, will catch the information, they will process it even in a more, like overactive way.
Mhm. Yeah,
Um,
I think it's interesting. I think our bodies are responding to things we don't even really realize, to your point.
mhm. You've been recognized in a big way, including the American Society of Interior Designers Designer of Distinction Award, and being named in 2025 among the top 20 leaders reshaping workplace strategy and office design. Is there one project you'd love to highlight where your strategy really came to life and what made the outcome feel special to you?
I think to me, the projects that are the most rewarding are the ones where you have a really true positive outcome. And one of them that comes to mind is we have been working recently on a project in Birmingham in the UK with Arup, the engineering company. And they wanted to create a space that was as inclusive and sustainable as possible. And so our team really shared a lot of the principles about how to design for neuro-inclusion that were incorporated from the beginning. And part of the reasons that they were incorporated, not only was it just that it made sense, but when you're designing for engineers or scientists, et cetera, they want the data and they want the facts. And we could show, here's the data, here's what it's saying. And so it helped them feel more confident in the decisions that they were making about how to go forward. But the result really was amazing. I think it's won multiple awards. It's a beautiful project. But the best part is when we were there once giving some tours, we had some of the people that were working in the space come up to us and inquire if we were the designers of the space and to say thank you. That for a group of individuals, there was one man specifically who had worked for the company for 10 years and never been able to really come into the office because he always got headaches from the lighting or the sound masking system or felt overwhelmed, and he just ended up working from home. He said this is the first office that he's ever been able to work in and not physically become ill or agitated in it, and that it's changed everything for him, that he's made more connections with his colleagues, that he feels more connected to the mission in that month than he had in 10 years. And so that to me is the biggest reward that we can get because ultimately, as a designer, we are designing for people. And knowing that we are designing in a positive way is the most important thing that we can do. So that was a fabulous project for us.
Mhm. This question is important actually for decision makers, investors, or people who are curious about it. Did it cost more or did it take more time than doing a regular project?
So we just finished the 500,000 square foot New York office for KPMG. And our client was asked that question when she was at a roundtable with us. And her response was this: no, it did not take more time and it did not cost more money. So let's address the time first. It probably took more time in the beginning to get people on board because there was a little bit of an education and there were some meetings and discussions and listening to what people had to say. But after that, the decision-making process throughout the entire rest of the project was expedited because once people were on board and they realized that we had this research and why we were making the decisions, it wasn't a matter of, do you like this or not? It was, this is why this works for you and why we are doing it based on who you are. And so it made everybody get on board faster. They felt better about the decisions that we were making, and they made decisions quicker. So that streamlined the process and actually reduced the amount of change orders we might have had later that would have cost money. It costs just as much money to design stupidly as it does intelligently. And I would actually argue it costs more money to design poorly because you have to go back and fix it, right?
Mm.
And so this is about making intentional choices that are smart from the beginning. And when we take that approach, it does not cost more money to do it the right way. We just feel better about all the decisions that we're making and we're spending the money in a more intelligent way that you're not going to have to go back and retrofit later. So no, it does not cost more money and it does not take more time.
The only thing we need is more awareness, more training about it, education.
And right, and awareness and education and for most of our clients, I think when they have that sense of pride in the spaces that they have, it makes them feel better, their satisfaction is increased, and that increase in awareness also means they understand if they're being bothered or sound in one area is getting too loud, they know they have options to go to other spaces and that they've been designed to do that. So it's very empowering for the users to be able to understand that and to have that awareness.
Mm. And education through training before even thinking that we have a project to do. So designers and people in the field must get this knowledge from somewhere.
Right. Well, we usually, for our clients, one of the very first things we do is kind of try to have an educational session. And I'll just give you an example. I went and spoke to a group once, there were 450 people. And in the beginning, they asked, does anybody understand or know what neurodiversity is? And only about 10% of the people in the room raised their hand. Then we spoke for an hour, kind of laid out the case and what this means and et cetera. And at the end, she asked, all right, how many of you are impacted by this? 90% of the hands in the room went up. And she said, wait a minute. Only 10% of you even knew what this was an hour ago. But it's something that I think is like the elephant in the room that we never really knew what it was or what to call it, but once we define it and we start to lay it out, people realize either that's me or that's my cousin or my brother or my child or my son or my mother or my father or my coworker, right? I mean, there were a lot of people looking at each other across that room as the light bulbs were going off.
It took you one
Yeah,
hour for that,
yeah,
you know. So
yeah.
imagine if we were giving it um, for the professional to become professional students of design and architecture, and to the clients, you know, through media or whatever we can do as professionals, to expand this knowledge.
Yeah, I think that's
Municipalities,
really important.
Mm.
We spend a lot of time speaking at universities and to students. And I think at one of the sessions we were speaking at, there was a dean of a major university for an architectural program in the US who said at the end, he looked very skeptical the entire time. So you never really know. But at the end, he said, as a dean of an architectural school, I've been very concerned that we've been designing monuments to ourselves. But this has made me realize that is probably true, and that we really need to take a more human-centric approach and remember who we are designing for, and the fact that they do have a physical reaction and a mental, social, psychological reaction to the spaces that we're designing, and we can't take that for granted. And that's true.
What's one message, mindset, or piece of advice you'd love to leave with our audience?
I think it's about I really hope, there's a lot of terminology about this, and we can debate a lot of the terms. We are living in a world that is increasingly anxious, that is increasingly overwhelming, and anything and everything that we can do to intentionally design spaces to address how people are processing and the cognitive well-being is absolutely critical for everyone, not just people that are neurodivergent, for all of us. But for them, it can be the difference of whether they're surviving and able to participate or not. And so I think the word is intentional design. And we need to be really have a deeper understanding about the impact of what we're doing and how we're designing and how that's influencing people and spaces.
Okay, thank you so much for this interesting conversation.
More than happy to. This topic is not a competitive advantage. This is a moral imperative. We believe that our industry of designers and architects have a moral responsibility to get it right. And so anything and everything that we can do as a community to share that, to get that out there, we are committed to doing.
Thank you again. And thanks for watching us.